morning at Singapore Airport, a pilot named Brody Torrance is rushing to catch his flight to Tokyo after running late. Before takeoff, he manages to video call his daughter, Daniela, who is vacationing in Hawaii. He promises to join her soon so they can spend New Year's together once his job is done. On Flight 119, which carries only 14 passengers, Brody is accompanied by his co-pilot Samuel, who warns that their route will pass through severe weather over the South China Sea. Brody suggests taking a longer but safer path, but the airline operator insists on a shorter route to save fuel and reduce costs, since the passenger count is low. Shortly after, the head flight attendant, Bonnie, introduces herself and calls Brody to the cabin. There he learns that a police officer is escorting a fugitive named Louis, a suspect in a murder case from 15 years ago who had been hiding in Bali under a false identity. Brody has no choice but to allow him on board, and he instructs the officer to keep a close watch while seating him away from other passengers. Once all passengers are seated, with Louis and the officer placed at the back, Brody announces that they will take the shorter route to Tokyo. The plane takes off smoothly. During the flight, Brody and Samuel chat casually, and it is revealed that Brody's wife passed away 3 years earlier. Not long after, the aircraft enters a storm. Brody requests permission from air traffic control to climb to a higher altitude for safety. Turbulence hits, shaking the plane and unsettling the passengers. Brody checks the cabin to ensure everyone is secure, but the storm does not let up. The situation quickly worsens. Violent turbulence strikes again, causing Brody to hit his head and start bleeding. The avionics suddenly fail, likely due to electrical damage, cutting off all communication with air traffic control and leaving them without navigation. They try everything to regain control, but nothing works. The systems continue failing, and they are left with only 10 minutes before the plane loses power completely. With no other option, Brody decides to make an emergency landing. The flight attendants instruct all passengers to fasten their seatbelts. Panic spreads as the plane descends sharply. The police officer unbuckles his seatbelt to grab his phone and contact his wife, and a flight attendant stands up to warn him. In that moment, a violent impact from turbulence kills both of them instantly. Eventually, they manage to pass through the storm, but only 4.5 minutes of power remain. Below them, there is nothing but open ocean. Brody asks Bonnie to prepare the passengers for a possible water landing. With no clear solution, Brody and Samuel quietly pray, each holding on to photos of their families. Then, at the last moment, Brody spots an island. Without knowing where they are, he decides to land there. Against all odds, the aircraft successfully touches down on the island. All surviving passengers are instructed to evacuate immediately. Bonnie takes the key to Louis' handcuffs from the deceased officer for safety reasons. In total, 19 people have survived, but they now find themselves stranded on a remote island with no idea where they are. This is plain. Out on the island, none of them can get any phone signal. Bonnie hands the key to Louis' handcuffs over to Brody, putting him in charge of the situation. Brody then gathers the passengers and explains what happened. The aircraft's main power and communication systems were destroyed by the lightning strike, which means there is no way to call for help. He urges everyone to stay calm and tells them to wait until the engines cool down before retrieving any belongings or drinking water. He reassures them that he and the crew will do everything they can to get everyone out safely. They quickly set up a basic shelter and begin rationing food. While the group tries to settle in, Brody and Samuel inspect the aircraft to assess the damage. After that, Brody respectfully secures the bodies of the fallen officer and flight attendant. He takes the officer's gun for protection and checks through Louis's belongings. Using what little information they have, Brody and Samuel estimate the plane's distance and speed from the moment it was struck by lightning. After doing the math, they realize something unsettling. They are somewhere near the Sulu Sea in the Philippines, specifically around a remote island group called Jolo. The area is known to be controlled by separatist groups and criminals, with no real government or law enforcement presence. Elsewhere among the survivors, one of the passengers starts recording a vlog about their situation and makes remarks about Louis. The comments quickly get under his skin, and his temper begins to show. At the same time, back at Trailblazers headquarters in New York, the company's executives, led by Terry, have already identified that Flight 119 lost contact somewhere west of the Philippines. Air traffic control in Manila confirms that the plane was last seen on radar around 6 a.m. local time. With the situation unclear, Terry immediately calls in David, a specialist in corporate strategy and crisis management. David instructs the team to prepare press statements for every possible scenario, including a missing aircraft, a fatal emergency landing, or even a hijacking. He also demands full details from the operator who approved the shorter route, including everything about the aircraft, Brody, the flight timeline, maintenance records, and his background. Meanwhile, back on Jolo Island, Brody realizes that waiting for rescue could take too long, especially with limited food and water. He decides to head toward a structure he spotted from the air, hoping it might have a working phone or radio. He does not go alone. He brings Louis with him and removes his handcuffs. Along the way, Brody mentions finding a folding knife on Louis that carries a military symbol. Louis reveals that he was once part of a parachute commando unit. He hints at a troubled past that led to his case 15 years ago, and explains that he had recently escaped from prison in Bali, trying to reconnect with his old group. As they continue moving, their conversation is suddenly cut short when Louis disappears without a trace. Elsewhere on the island, a local man reports to a leader known as Datuk that a low-flying aircraft passed over his home. He is certain it was not a military plane. Without hesitation, Datuk orders his men to search for it. News about the disappearance of Trailblazer Flight 119 quickly spreads, and when Daniela hears about it, she becomes deeply worried about her father's fate. Back at headquarters as the meeting continues, David uncovers some surprising details about Brody. He is a Scottish pilot with British citizenship who once served in the Royal Air Force. After that, he spent 20 years flying commercial aircraft, but his career eventually declined, placing him on lower-tier routes. The reason behind it becomes clear. Years ago, Brody was involved in an incident where he physically assaulted a passenger who had started a fight with him. Realizing the seriousness of the situation, David immediately assigns a team led by John to locate the missing aircraft. He also authorizes an emergency fund of $500,000 in case it becomes necessary. Meanwhile, Brody finally reaches the building he spotted earlier. It is abandoned and marked with signs of past violence, including bullet holes scattered across the walls. Inside, he finds a damaged telephone and attempts to fix it by reconnecting the wires. After some effort, the phone powers on, and he quickly calls Trailblazer's customer service. He identifies himself, gives the flight code, and explains the situation. Unfortunately, the call is dismissed as a prank, since the company has already been flooded with false reports about the missing plane. Without his employee badge number, which he does not have with him, Brody cannot prove his identity. With no other option, he calls Daniela and asks her to write down everything he says. He begins explaining that the plane has landed somewhere in the Sulu Sea, near the Jolo Island group. But just as he is getting the message across, he is suddenly attacked. One of Datuk's men storms in, but Brody manages to fight back and kill him. Moments later, another armed man arrives, and it turns out to be Louis. He has already taken down two of Datuk's men and taken their weapons. As they prepare to leave the building, they discover something disturbing. In one of the rooms, there are signs of violence, including blood trails, surveillance equipment, and scattered passports. After checking their recordings, they realize the truth. Datuk's group regularly kidnaps foreigners and holds them for ransom, forcing governments to pay for their release. Understanding the danger, they rush back toward the plane using a vehicle taken from Datuk's men, hoping to warn the others. But they are already too late. The separatist group has arrived first. They demand the passenger list and ask for Captain Brody's whereabouts. Samuel, trying to protect everyone, says that Brody went to find a way to call for help. Under pressure, the situation quickly spirals out of control. A panicked passenger attempts to escape and is immediately shot. Her husband tries to fight back, but he is overpowered and killed without hesitation. The remaining survivors are taken captive, while Datuk orders his men to collect all valuables from the plane. After the group leaves, Brody and Louis ambush two of the remaining guards. One is killed and the other is captured. From him, they learn that the passengers have been taken to a village called Danduri, specifically to a warehouse by the river. From there, they are to be transported by boat, though the final destination remains unknown. As a responsible pilot, Brody makes a bold decision to head straight to Danduri village. When he returns to the plane, he discovers that the power has been partially restored, thanks to Samuel's efforts. Brody quickly checks the route to Danduri and leaves a message on his uniform, explaining to anyone who might arrive that he has gone to rescue the kidnapped passengers. After Louis takes down the last remaining enemy near the area, the two of them set off toward the village. Back at headquarters, David and the officials finally piece everything together. They receive confirmation from Brody's earlier calls to customer service and to Daniela, which leads them to pinpoint the landing location. Without wasting time, David orders John and his team to deploy immediately. Once they land, they inspect the plane, discover two bodies and find Brody's message along with the coordinates. Meanwhile, at the hostage site, several passengers are being recorded while stating their names and nationalities. Not far from there, Brody and Lewis locate a boat and realize the captives are about to be transported off the island. If that happens, rescuing them will become nearly impossible. Acting quickly, they silently eliminate two enemies who are refueling the boat, avoiding gunfire to stay undetected. Nearby, they spot Datuk's group in a warehouse where the hostages are being held. They move in from behind, taking out two guards with blunt force and carefully escorting the passengers onto a bus. However, the area is heavily guarded, and escape will not be easy. In a desperate move, Brody surrenders himself to distract the enemies, giving the others a chance to get away. He risks everything, hoping the captives will be released and reunited with their families. But Datuk has no intention of letting anyone go. To him, every outsider on the island is a valuable asset. Brody, seen as a key figure, is about to be executed as an example to pressure governments into paying ransom. At the last moment, John and his team arrive and launch a counterattack. A fierce firefight breaks out, and many of Datuk's men are taken down. The group manages to break free and rush back to the plane. Even though the aircraft has regained some power, it is still heavily damaged, and Brody does what he can to keep it operational. As the passengers board, John and his team hold off the incoming enemy convoys. Gunfire erupts again, and the remaining enemies are gradually eliminated.
Moving!
Amid the chaos, Louis tells Brody that he cannot leave with them, choosing instead to avoid being captured and sent back to prison. As Brody makes his way to the plane, he is shot in the leg by Datuk. Despite the injury, he pushes forward and instructs John's team to board the aircraft within 2 minutes of engine startup. With the plane in critical condition, Brody contacts headquarters and explains that they will be flying without radar or navigation systems, with a maximum range of only 400 kilometers. He requests guidance and a safe place to land. John and his team quickly board the aircraft while Louis disappears into the forest, taking the emergency fund of $500,000 with him. From the enemy's side, only Datuk and one remaining fighter are left. They move quickly to block the runway, preparing to fire an RPG at the plane before it can take off. At the critical moment, Louis intervenes from the forest, taking a precise shot that throws off their aim. Now alone, Datuk hurriedly reloads his weapon and prepares for one final attempt. But Brody shows no hesitation. He pushes the aircraft to full speed, committing fully to the takeoff. In a shocking turn, Datuk is killed as the plane's landing gear strikes him during the acceleration. Moments later, more of Datuk's forces arrive. But by then, the aircraft is already gaining altitude and out of reach. Even so, the danger is far from over. The plane has taken heavy damage, especially to the right engine, which was hit during the attack. Back at headquarters, Brody is guided towards Siasi Island, a nearby location with a small airstrip that offers their best chance of survival. The flight becomes a tense struggle. The aircraft is barely holding together, smoke trailing behind, and its stability is compromised. As they approach the runway at Siasi, the plane begins to lose control, swaying dangerously as it descends. At the last possible moment, Brody manages to bring the aircraft down safely. Emergency responders rush in immediately, providing medical aid and securing the survivors. One by one, the passengers express their gratitude to Brody, who risked everything to keep them alive. In the final moments, an injured Brody reaches out to Daniela. Despite everything he has been through, his only concern is that he could not make it home on time. So the moral of the story is never trust a shortcut flight, always keep your seatbelt on, and if a pilot asks a fugitive for help, just sit quietly and hope they both know what they're doing.